I've got some troubling news about England's royal family. The final stroke of Prince William's pen did more than approve a royal document. It severed Meghan's last ceremonial connection to the crown. Inside a guarded Windsor chamber, the future king signed a decree, removing every remaining right attached to the HRH style, closing a chapter the palace had struggled to contain for years. Yet the silence after the signature revealed something deeper. This was not merely punishment, it was a declaration of control. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William read the final page twice before touching the black fountain pen. No advisor interrupted him. No clerk dared fill the silence. The final royal status decree, a formal order, defining which royal privileges could still be claimed, lay beneath the embossed seal, carrying consequences far beyond a line of ceremonial wording. Meghan had already stopped using the HRH style in public. But this decree went further. It removed palace recognition, precedence, language, official representation, and any automatic route back into royal life without the sovereign's direct approval. The prince tightened his grip. He knew he was acting against his brother's wife, and that knowledge cut deeper than any legal warning on the page. Yet he also believed the monarchy could no longer survive on blurred promises and private exceptions. Every unresolved privilege invited another dispute. Every hesitation weakened the authority he would one day inherit. So he signed, set down the pen, and pushed the document toward the waiting clerk. Charles received confirmation minutes later in his private study. The king removed his glasses, read the notice once then again, before placing it face down without a word. His silence carried no victory. It carried the weight of a father who understood that protecting the crown might cost him what remained of his family. Across the Atlantic, Meghan answered a secure call shortly after dawn. She listened without interruption. As the decision was read to her, she asked only whether William had personally signed it. When the answer came, her voice hardened. A documented account of that call later recorded that she requested the exact wording of the final clause. That clause changed everything. It blocked the HRH question from being reopened through family negotiations, public reconciliation campaigns, or future ceremonial invitations. The door had not been narrowed. It had been closed under any future reign. But Meghan was already preparing a direct message for William. And inside it was a reference to a private promise made before she left Britain, a promise the future king could no longer pretend had never existed. Behind the constitutional language were three people bound by family resentment and years of unfinished conversations. William believed he was defending an institution he would one day inherit. Meghan believed she was being erased by the very family that had once welcomed her. And Harry stood between them, carrying the impossible knowledge that whichever side he defended would confirm the other side's deepest fear. The decree had been signed, but its true cost was only beginning to emerge. William did not see royal styles as private possessions that could be carried wherever someone chose. To him, they were public trusts, formal signs that a person was acting on behalf of the crown and accepting the duties that came with that role. The prince feared that leaving Meghan's status unresolved would blur the line between working royals serving the monarchy and family members building independent lives abroad. That uncertainty mattered, because every invitation, commercial introduction, and charitable partnership could reopen the same argument. Meghan saw something far more painful. The decree did not feel like a technical correction. It felt like an attempt to rewrite her history, diminish her marriage, and place distance between her children and the family into which they had been born. She believed the palace was trying to separate the woman she had become from the chapter of her life it could no longer control. For her, the loss was not only ceremonial, it was personal. Harry received the full document alone. He read the passage. Naming his wife, walked toward the window and remained there until she entered the room. Meghan immediately noticed the pages trembling in his hand. She expected anger, but he looked stunned, almost hollow. That hesitation cut her deeply. She asked why he was standing there in silence, when his brother had just closed the final royal door against her. Harry struggled to answer. He wanted to defend his wife without hesitation. Yet he could also feel the last thread connecting him to Charles and William, tightening around him. Meghan saw his conflict as weakness. He saw it as grief. The Duke knew that one furious response could destroy what little remained between the brothers, but silence risked making his wife believe she stood alone. William faced the same fracture at Windsor. Catherine noticed that his tea had gone cold and asked whether the decree was truly final. He answered that leaving even one loophole would only delay the same crisis. The Princess of Wales warned that the public might see revenge rather than duty, especially because his signature, not the king's, appeared on the final authorization. He did not deny the danger. A documented palace briefing later showed that Charles had transferred limited authority over royal status enforcement to his heir after weeks of internal disagreement. That authority allowed William to protect the boundaries of official royal service, but it also forced him to carry the blame. Personally, Catherine understood that burden, and he understood her fear. Harry had already written to his brother asking for a private family settlement. The letter reached Windsor too late. By then, the final wording had been approved, and the decision could no longer be softened by another promise. Yet the deepest wound had begun much earlier. It had not started with a memoir, an interview, or a public accusation. It began during one royal ceremony when a direct instruction was ignored in front of senior family members. That ceremony would later be remembered inside the palace, as the moment hesitation ended and William began preparing for a decision no one believed he would dare to sign. Every royal rupture has a point of no return, a moment that appears small until its consequences become impossible to contain. For William, that moment came during a private Commonwealth reception at St. James's Palace. Meghan was not expected to attend yet. Her name appeared on a confidential guest memorandum beside the HRH style. When the future king discovered who had authorised it, the room's polite calm gave way to a confrontation that would reshape the monarchy's internal rules. William received the advance programme only minutes before senior guests were due to arrive. The Commonwealth Legacy Reception. A formal gathering linking the Crown with representatives from nations connected through the Commonwealth had been planned with extreme care because every name, title, and seating position carried diplomatic meaning. He scanned the pages quickly, then stopped. Beside Meghan's name stood the words, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex. Despite the existing agreement that the style would not be used while she remained outside official royal duties, the prince circled the wording and asked who had approved it. A senior courtier admitted that Meghan's representative had requested historical accuracy in private correspondence with an event organiser. The answer hardened William's expression. The programme had been withdrawn before public distribution, but several diplomatic copies were already resting on chairs. What began as a private wording dispute had become a possible constitutional embarrassment, because foreign guests might believe she was once again acting with official royal authority. William carried one copy into a side room and placed it on the table. He demanded to know why unofficial channels kept testing boundaries the family had already agreed upon. The courtier tried to explain that no insult had been intended, but the future king cut through the defence. Intent no longer mattered. Repeated ambiguity was becoming a weapon, and every exception made the monarchy appear unable to control its own rules. Meghan's anger emerged later through a recorded private conversation reviewed by palace advisors. She argued that she had never surrendered her identity and refused to accept that stepping away from royal duties should erase her place within the family. To her, the wording was not a claim of power. It was recognition of a chapter. The palace seemed determined to bury Harry. Called William that evening, the brothers began calmly, but the restraint collapsed when the Duke accused the institution of treating his wife like a threat instead of a relative. The prince answered that family connection could not be used to imply public authority. Harry fired back that the monarchy had no moral right to decide which parts of Meghan's history remained visible. William ended the call. That silence became the true beginning. The future king ordered a full review of every unresolved privilege connected to non-working royal status, turning a bitter family argument into a formal constitutional process. Charles asked for restraint, fearing a permanent decree would destroy his last hope of reconciliation with his younger son. Yet William refused to delay again. Then Meghan invoked an old promise one made before she left Britain and forced him toward the meeting he had spent years avoiding. The palace had spent years escaping a face-to-face reckoning, but one private conversation would finally place William and Meghan across the same table, with no aides left to soften their words. There were no cameras, no press secretaries, and no carefully prepared smiles. When Meghan entered the private sitting room at Windsor, William was already waiting beside a table holding the disputed programme and the unfinished decree. For the first time since the family fracture became public, they faced each other without Harry Charles or palace aides between them. What followed was not a negotiation. It was the release of every grievance both had refused to say aloud. Meghan remained standing after the door closed. The prince gestured toward a chair, but she refused to move until he answered one question. Did he intend to remove her HRH rights permanently? The style meant more than formal letters before a name. It signalled that someone carried official standing within the royal household. William did not avoid her eyes. He said, the monarchy could not preserve dormant privileges when those privileges continued to create confusion, private leverage and competing claims of authority. Her anger sharpened. Meghan told him the palace had welcomed her as a symbol when it suited the institution. then treated her identity as an administrative problem. When she refused to remain silent, she accused the family of celebrating her presence in public while questioning her place in private. For her, the unfinished decree was not about order. It was a final attempt to control how the world remembered her. William answered without raising his voice. He said the decision was not designed to silence her or erase her marriage. It was meant to stop a private individual from carrying the implication of official royal authority while openly challenging the institution from outside it. The future king insisted that the distinction mattered because governments, charities, and foreign guests could mistake personal influence for crown approval. Meghan then mentioned the promise before she and Harry left Britain. William had privately assured his brother that no final decision about their royal status would be made without a family conversation involving all three of them. A documented account of that earlier exchange recorded the assurance clearly. The prince admitted he had made it, yet he argued that the Commonwealth reception had changed everything, proving that informal understandings could be tested, stretched, and quietly rewritten. Meghan removed a ring from her right hand and placed it beside the disputed programme. She said the family always turned human pain into paperwork whenever emotion became inconvenient. William closed the decree and replied that pain could not become a permanent exemption from responsibility. The silence became unbearable. She pushed the untouched chair backward and told him the document would reveal more about the kind of king he intended to become than it would ever reveal about her. The prince did not stop her. As she turned toward the door, but the force of her words remained, after she left, Charles had already learned that the meeting happened without his knowledge. The king's reaction would not be quiet, because William had crossed more than a family boundary. He had acted with the confidence of a sovereign before the reigning monarch had finished deciding what the crown could afford to lose. The confrontation had ended without agreement. But another struggle was already beginning, this time between the reigning monarch and the son preparing to succeed him. William's signature carried enormous force, but it did not exist in isolation. Behind the decree stood an aging king torn between two duties, protecting the monarchy and protecting what remained of his family. Charles had delayed the decision repeatedly, hoping time might soften the conflict. Yet as the legal review expanded, he discovered that refusing to act was becoming an action of its own. One that threatened to burden the next reign with unresolved choices. Charles summoned his son to a private audience as soon as he learned about the meeting with Meghan. The king remained sovereign, meaning the final constitutional authority still belonged to him. But William had been granted delegated royal power over styles, patronages, ceremonial precedents, and future eligibility for official duties. That arrangement was meant to prepare the heir for responsibility. Instead, it placed the most dangerous family decision of the reign directly in his hands. The monarch stood beside his desk and asked why William had acted without warning him. The prince answered that warning him would have produced another postponement. Delay had already allowed a private ambiguity to become public confusion, and every attempt to soften the issue had created another opening for it to return. Charles heard the logic, but he also heard something colder beneath it. His son had begun making decisions as though the next reign had already started. Charles feared losing Harry completely. He knew the younger prince would not see the decree as a technical correction. He would see it as a rejection of Meghan, their marriage and the life they had chosen together. That fear mattered because the father and son were already separated by years of anger, missed calls and conversations that ended before either man said what he truly meant. Camilla urged restraint of a different kind. During a quiet conversation, the Queen Consort told Charles that overruling William after granting him authority would weaken both reigns at once. She noticed his hand trembling over Harry's last letter and gently turned the page for him. The king did not thank her. He simply kept reading while she remained beside him in silence. A confidential legal memorandum hardened the choice. It warned that the dormant HRH arrangement had no stable long-term meaning and could be tested through invitations, commercial descriptions, diplomatic introductions, and charitable partnerships. Each new dispute would force the palace to explain whether Meghan was speaking privately or carrying royal authority. Charles asked whether a narrower decree could work. The constitutional secretary answered plainly. Partial restrictions would guarantee future arguments over interpretation. The monarch closed his eyes, then gave William one condition. Meghan's dignity as Harry's wife and the mother of their children had to remain protected, even while every official HRH entitlement ended. William accepted. The decision was settled, but Harry had already learnt the truth. His father possessed the power to stop the decree and had chosen not to use it. For him, the signature was painful. Charles's silence was unforgivable, and the first consequences would erupt before the palace announcement was even released. The decree had not yet reached the public when its consequences began tearing through the family in private. In California, Harry called his father repeatedly. At Windsor, Charles watched the unanswered call. Light flashed beside him, but could not bring himself to lift the receiver. Meghan, meanwhile, moved beyond shock. She began reviewing every organisation invitation and public document that had ever referenced her royal status. Realising that William's signature had reached much further than a title, Meghan sat with legal advisors as charitable agreements, event invitations. Digital biographies and archived correspondence were opened one after another. The HRH style, formal wording showing that someone acts with recognised royal standing, appeared in old introductions and private records long after she had stopped using it publicly. One advisor explained that organisations connected to the Crown would now receive instructions to remove those references permanently. She closed the folder and said the palace would not be allowed to describe her life as an error that needed correction. Harry's anger moved faster than the paperwork. He left Charles a private voice message after another unanswered call, beginning with controlled words and ending with a broken question. Did his father understand that silence now felt like consent? The Duke waited for an answer that did not come, while Meghan watched him struggle between fury and the hope that the king might still call back. Charles listened to the recording, alone. The monarch reached toward the telephone when his son's voice ended, then pulled his hand away as an aide entered carrying the public announcement schedule. That hesitation mattered. One returned. Call might have softened the personal wound, but it could also have been mistaken for uncertainty about a decree the palace was preparing to defend. The consequences were precise. Meghan would receive no HRH styling in official archives moving forward. Hold no authority to represent the sovereign. Retain no ceremonial precedence as a senior working royal and possess no automatic route back into formal duties. Yet she would remain Duchess of Sussex through marriage. The peerage title, a rank connected to Harry's dukedom rather than active royal service, separated her family identity from the official privileges William had removed. Catherine learned that the announcement was scheduled during her engagement, supporting children's mental health charities. She immediately asked William to change the timing. The princess refused to let vulnerable children become the background to a family punishment, and the prince agreed without argument. He wanted the decree to stand openly, not hide behind her public work. Harry then withdrew from a planned private visit with Charles. His brief message said he was not ready to enter a room where the decision had already been made. The king read it twice, while the younger prince waited in California with no expectation of a reply. Meghan drafted a public response, but Harry asked her not to release it yet. He wanted one finer. When William answered Harry's call, neither brother began with anger. For several seconds, they said nothing at all. There were no advisors taking notes and no palace officials waiting to translate their words into formal language. It was simply the heir and the exile, the older brother carrying the crown's future, and the younger one carrying the wounds. Of its past, in that silence, both understood that the decree had become larger than Meghan's title. Harry spoke first. He asked William to forget constitutional rules for a few minutes and speak as his brother. The prince agreed, though his voice remained guarded. The Duke admitted he no longer expected the palace to restore Meghan's HRH status. The style was a formal sign of official royal standing, but the deeper wound was not its loss. It was the humiliation of discovering a family decision through legal channels instead of hearing it directly from someone he once trusted a private conversation with. William, no secretaries, no lawyers, and no wives present. The document had divided the institution, but the final judgment would be shaped by something far more fragile. Two brothers speaking honestly after years of communicating through silence. William accepted the accusation. He said the process had become so sensitive that every conversation began to feel like a negotiation. He had started measuring each word for future consequences and stopped seeing the people trapped inside the dispute. The future king admitted that Harry deserved to hear the decision. Before the documents reached him, even if nothing in the final decree would have changed. Harry's anger weakened, but his fear remained. He said the order might begin with Meghan. Yet its shadow could reach their children. One day they might believe their place in the family depended on whether their parents obeyed the palace. The Duke wanted to know whether the monarchy planned to treat them as extensions of an argument they had never chosen. William answered without hesitation. The children's family connection would not be questioned. He explained that the decree contained protective language preventing their identity from being reduced to their parents' conflict. The prince then moved the official briefing folder away from him. He no longer wanted prepared language standing between them. William finally admitted what power had done to him. Becoming the future king had made him afraid of leaving unresolved crises for his own children. He had watched uncertainty pass from one generation to another until private resentment became public damage. That fear, he said, was why the final clause had to close every route to renewed bargaining. Harry went silent when his brother revealed the hardest truth palace lawyers had not written. That clause, William had written it himself. The Duke still called the decision wrong, yet he now understood it had not been created by faceless courts or driven by Camilla. It came from his brother's judgment, carrying all the responsibility and all the blame. No forgiveness followed. Clarity did. Harry said he would not challenge the decree through public legal action. So William thanked him, but neither man pretended the wound had healed. They ended the call divided, no longer confused and painfully aware that millions would soon judge a decision. The family itself had only just understood. By morning, their private reckoning would become a global royal earthquake. At exactly 9 o'clock, the palace released 23 lines that ignited a worldwide argument. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming. Newsrooms rebuilt their front pages. Crowds gathered outside royal gates. Some praised William's firmness, and others condemned what they saw as a calculated humiliation. Yet one image came to define the morning. Meghan's name printed beneath the words, her status permanently withdrawn. While the future king's signature appeared below the final paragraph, Buckingham Palace published the final royal status decree through its official bulletin, Royal Household Circular, and accredited press office at the same moment. The circular was the formal notice used to record decisions carrying institutional weight, while the press office delivered the wording to the public. That distinction mattered, because the announcement was not being presented as gossip punishment or a temporary family measure. It was being entered into the monarchy's permanent record. The London Chronicle rebuilt its next edition within minutes. Its black and gold front page carried the words, "The Final Decree," with William's signature enlarged beneath a split image of the brothers. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered near the Victoria Memorial. As supporters and critics argued beneath live broadcast lights, one elderly woman raised a small Union flag and told a reporter that royal privilege must require royal service. A younger protester answered that family pain should never be settled through public erasure. A national anchor called the order. The clearest boundary drawn between the House of Windsor and the Sussex household since their departure. The House of Windsor meant the reigning royal family and the institution built around it. But the phrase sounded colder that morning. It turned a private fracture into two opposing sides. Meghan watched the coverage with the television muted. She stopped when William's signature filled the screen, then switched it off before commentators began debating her motives. Harry remained nearby, saying little. He had promised not to challenge the decree, but keeping that promise did not make the humiliation easier to absorb. William received the first press summary while travelling to a scheduled engagement. The prince refused to read social media reactions and asked only whether the wording had been reported accurately. His restraint carried purpose. He knew that defending himself emotionally would make the decree look personal, while silence allowed the document to speak with institutional force. Charles grew uneasy when coverage began describing his son as a shadow king, already exercising powers linked to the next reign. The monarch ordered a second clarification, stating that he had authorised the process and fully recognised the result. He would not allow the public to believe William had acted against him. Harry kept his word. A representative released a restrained statement, acknowledging the decision while rejecting any claim that Meghan's work had ever depended upon royal styling. The public battle changed nothing. The monarchy had chosen a permanent boundary over temporary peace. When the crowds dispersed and the broadcasts moved on, 4 people were left with the truth behind the spectacle, and none could return to the relationship they had before the signature. The decree did not produce victory. William did not celebrate. Meghan did not disappear. Harry did not surrender his loyalty to his wife. And Charles did not stop loving the son who had moved beyond his reach. What ended was not a person's relevance, but a dangerous ambiguity that had kept the family trapped between private identity and public authority. The Crown had drawn its line. Every person involved now had to decide how to live beyond it. Meghan permanently lost every remaining HRH right. Precedents claim representative function and automatic path back into official royal service. The HRH style was formal recognition that someone carried. Standing on behalf of the monarchy, and William's decree removed that connection forever. Yet she remained Duchess of Sussex through her marriage, preserving her place beside Harry, while separating that identity from active royal authority. Meghan read the decree one final time, before placing it inside a closed drawer. She did not tear it apart. She did not leave it, displayed as a symbol of anger. Instead, she told Harry that she would not spend the next chapter of her life asking an institution to validate the future she had already built. He listened carefully, then confirmed that no legal challenge would be made. The Duke chose his wife and children without pretending the decision had not wounded him. For years, he had tried to keep one foot inside the royal structure. Now that struggle was over, William returned to the Windsor room where he had signed the document. The prince paused beside the empty table and understood that leadership could solve an institutional crisis while creating a permanent personal scar. Catherine joined him later and spoke with quiet honesty. She told the future king that decisiveness might protect the crown, but compassion would determine what kind of monarch he became after the difficult decisions were finished. He carried those words with him because she had named the burden no decree could remove. Charles faced his own truth in private. The king wrote a letter to Harry, not to reverse the order or defend the palace, but to separate a father's love from the choice he had upheld as sovereign. A documented account of the letter confirmed that it contained no constitutional language, no request for immediate reconciliation, and no excuse. The monarch simply wrote that the door to a personal relationship remained open, even though the royal question was closed. The verdict was final. Meghan lost the rights, but she did not lose her voice, her marriage, her public identity, or her power to shape a life outside the palace. Harry gained no restored status, but he gained complete clarity about where his loyalty now stood. Charles accepted that delaying pain had never preserved peace, it had only transferred the burden to his heir. William emerged as a future sovereign, willing to choose certainty over comfort. His decree proved that family membership, commercial independence, and official royal authority would no longer remain deliberately blurred. The Sussex HRH chapter was over forever. The decision did not heal the family, but it ended the uncertainty that had kept every wound open. Meghan moved forward without royal authority. Harry stood beside her. Charles preserved a father's private hope. William carried the cost of the crown's final decision. The last royal decree did not erase Meghan from history. It permanently defined the boundary between the life she left behind and the future she chose to claim.